So thanks for joining us. So far, we got a few folks in here, and I see we got Colin on board. Logan is with us. Danielle is in the background running the main CASAA page. Looks like we've got Cheryl joining us as well. Just waiting for folks to filter in, and then we'll get started.
Real quick, can you hear my fan? I know that's kind of an odd way to start the show, but it's super warm up in my room right now. I'm trying to cool it down. We had kind of a heat wave roll through down here today.
No, I think,
and I hope that it's not. I just hope that it's not too loud.
No, I can't hear it at all.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, everyone.
Well, I guess we'll, since this is live and on the air, we'll go ahead and get started. Folks can filter in, and we've got our special guests for this evening signed in as speakers. So I'll get right to it. As the title says, tonight we're joined by Dr. Colin Mendelsohn and Dr. Cheryl Olsen. For folks who don't know our guests tonight, Dr. Colin Mendelsohn is one of Australia's leading experts on smoking cessation. He was the founding chairman of the Australian Tobacco Harm Reduction Association and is a member of the committee that develops the, I looked this up, Royal Australian College of General Practitioners National Smoking Cessation Guidelines. He was a co-joint associate professor in the School of Public Health and Community Medicine at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, and is actively involved in research, teaching, and writing about smoking and vaping. And I read that bio off the back of his new book, which I highly recommend to folks and is about to become a well-thumbed resource for me. Stop Smoking, Start Vaping, The Healthy Truth About Vaping. You can pick that up on any of the online booksellers of your choice. Welcome, Colin. And also, we are joined by Dr. Cheryl Olsen, previously a guest on our podcast on Saturdays. Thanks for joining us there, and thanks for coming back. She is an expert on using media to change attitudes and actions that promote health. She co-founded the Center for Mental Health and Media at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard Medical School. Internationally known researcher on video game violence, author, media producer, speaker, consults to nonprofits, foundations, and corporations. And you can read all of that and more on her website, drcherylolsen.com. Welcome, Cheryl. Thank you for joining us again.
Glad to be with you.
So I think the topic du jour is what we recently saw out of the Truth Initiative, which has been this sort of ongoing campaign that seems to be coming to a head. And I kind of wanted to give you guys an opportunity. Obviously your work has something to do with what we'll be talking about later, but maybe we'll start with Colin, since he hasn't been with us before. Maybe take a few minutes and give us a bit about your background and how that sort of may intersect with what we're talking about tonight, which is mental health and nicotine and so on.
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for asking me. And yeah, look, I've been working in the field of tobacco treatment for 35, 40 years, mainly as a clinician, but increasingly as a researcher, a teacher, writer, and advocate. And I've become very involved in tobacco harm reduction because it's such a wonderful option for smokers who can't otherwise quit. I worked in a private psychiatry hospital for several years and had a lot of experience with smokers who had mental illness and came to learn a lot about this. And this has become a special interest of mine. As you all know, smoking is a major problem with mental illness. There are very high smoking rates. These people smoke more heavily, they're more addicted, they have lower quit rates. But they are as motivated to quit as the rest of the population, but we do tend to forget about them. I just thought I'd say a few words about why they smoke, because the question is, is it what comes first, the stress or the smoking, or is it both? Well, there are common genetic factors. So if you've got schizophrenia or depression, you're more likely to smoke because of common genes. So that's just something to keep in mind. There definitely are genetic factors. But smoking does give short-term relief from anxiety and depression. It does help people to cope with stress, and people for that purpose. So it's one of those positive benefits of self-medication. But smoking itself does probably increase stress levels overall, because there's these constant episodes of withdrawal. There's thinking about when and where you can smoke next. There's worrying about your health, the financial stress, and the chemical effects of a lot of the 7,000 chemicals in the smoke. So there certainly are factors which create stress. And there is the stress paradox, which the Truth Initiative refers to in this document. So this is that some of the calming effect of smoking is due to the relief of nicotine withdrawal. And people attribute that to smoking relieves stress, but it's actually partly, the calming effect is partly due to, well, I'm in nicotine withdrawal and this is relieving it. So nicotine must relieve stress. Well, it only relieves withdrawal stress. But people with mental illness also smoke to relieve boredom. It helps with social interaction, helps reduce weight gain. So there are lots of reasons why people take up smoking. But the important thing is that quitting smoking improves mental health. People who stop smoking have reduced anxiety, reduced depression, reduced suicide risk. There are many studies showing that they have improved quality of life, and of course they save a lot of money. So if you're smoking and you have mental illness or stress, there's no question that quitting smoking is a very positive step. So that's smoking. Just going back to vaping, I think for people with mental illness, it's very hard for many of them to quit. And vaping is a very appealing option. And we know that people with mental illness are more likely to try e-cigarettes and are more likely to be currently using them than other smokers. And the limited studies so far have shown that they do seem to help people to stop or substantially reduce their smoking. So there are a number of studies. I mean, we need more, but there's no reason why it shouldn't work in this population, or that it may not work as well. But there is some evidence it's effective. So in terms of what are the benefits of vaping nicotine for people with mental illness, I think it's really important to understand that nicotine does have positive effects, and people use it for those positive effects. And so when we know from a number of studies that nicotine improves attention, concentration, cognitive function, working memory, and some other functions in smokers and non-smokers. So nicotine does improve brain function, especially in schizophrenia, but it's also very beneficial for ADHD. It improves attention and cognitive function in that group as well. So it is good for people with mental illness. And Neil Benowitz, who's the nicotine guru, in one of his reviews says, nicotine reduces stress and anxiety in smokers. Smokers come to use nicotine to modulate the level of arousal and for mood control in daily life. So it certainly does help on its own, help with anxiety and mood. And it does have an antidepressant effect, and there are studies that show that it releases serotonin through that pathway. But if you're vaping and you've got mental illness, it will help to relieve boredom and improve social interaction. It saves money, and all these things are important benefits. It does counter some of the negative symptoms of mental illness. A lot of people with schizophrenia are not motivated. Nicotine is a stimulant. It reduces the side effects of some of the medications. And well, in the UK, of course, they have it in psychiatric facilities, and I think it has a really important role there to reduce aggression and to give comfort to people who are regular nicotine users. And I guess the final thing I wanted to say is that studies demonstrate an association between vaping and adolescents and adults with mental illness, but there's no evidence it causes mental illness. It's a popular quitting aid for people with mental illness, and it does relieve symptoms. There is some evidence Smoking may increase the risk of
Colin,
mental illness. Anxiety is for that from
Colin, I've been
vaping.
I've been waiting to interrupt because things were going okay, but it sounds like your connection is really kind of choppy here. I don't know if.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
I've got my AirPods on.
I wasn't
That's
sure
all right.
for a
I'll
minute.
take
Maybe
my
it's just me.
No, I'll disconnect my AirPods and put on some other headphones. Let's try that. Sorry. Forget this device. So do you want to just push on and I'll do this and get back to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'd love to pitch it to Cheryl for a little bit, and I've already got questions, based on what you've said, Colin. And I think, first of all, I'd love to give Cheryl an opportunity to introduce herself to our listeners, but also, given your area of expertise, one of the things that has sort of struck me over the past day is, talking about it actually comes from the Truth Initiative report. Where I had it up here, colliding crisis, youth mental health, and nicotine use. And, there's a sort of a breakdown from a survey on page 6, I think. And it talks about young people who quit vaping saying that they feel less stressed. 78% of them said they would feel better about themselves if they quit vaping. And I'm sort of curious, as maybe tacking on at the end of your introduction, Cheryl, is it possible that all of the messaging and the anti-vaping campaigns are actually a cause of stress and depression for young people?
That's an interesting idea. Is my sound okay, by the way?
You sound great.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I doubt that all of the, well, certainly raising people's concerns about vaping as something that could hurt them, as we saw with all of the stuff about the myth that EVALI was caused by vaping and not by vaping nicotine and not THC. That certainly might add to the burden, but it sounds like what's really going on. I mean, when truth is telling the truth about the youth mental health. The data are showing that anxiety and depression are going up during all of this, the upheaval of COVID. But given that, one of the things that concerns me, I mean, and I speak here, I use a certain tone here deliberately. I always want to assume that everybody is trying to help, do the right thing, that they have good intentions. The motivation is to help the mental health of young people. So I'm going to try to keep that tone in mind, try to take the perspective of the truth folks a little bit. And I'm thinking about, why did they choose to take this path, this depression stick campaign idea? And, obviously they were looking, I picked up the Wall Street Journal article from last September where they talked to their someone from their ad agency, which was called Mojo Supermarket, and about why they took this approach. And apparently they saw this thing, they're looking, what can we latch onto that's in the news to get fresh attention, which is what everybody does, of course. And this guy from the agency says that teens don't like to be preached to in ads, so they were looking for something they listened to. And he says, when I grew up, there were reasons to quit, referring to the health effects of cigarettes. We knew it caused cancer. People think vapes are just diet cigarettes. I don't know who these people are. We can't go with the same reasons and say it still causes cancer, but a little bit less. We needed a new reason for a new generation. I find that kind of appalling because, I mean, first of all, that's just spreading falsehoods about vaping causing cancer like smoking, but just a little bit less. And it's saying, well, cancer is not relevant to young people today. So we want to look for something that is relevant, even when the Truth Initiative's own website is saying that the research link between, this as a causal thing, vaping or smoking as a causal thing is tenuous. But what this reminds me of, when we look at what they were doing with this whole campaign, this depression stick, they talked about how they were, stopping people on the street and accusing them of being, shills or something like that. And it made me think about the guerrilla marketing campaigns in the 80s and 90s, where they were, before the internet, people had to find other ways to kind of go viral in the media that existed then and make a splash. but usually that was something associated with a small, scrappy group, and with a minimal budget, and not with this giant, well-funded entity like the Truth Initiative. And I also feel like it's one thing to go guerrilla marketing and go, maybe pay a little fast and loose with things for a good cause against cigarettes, which actually are killing hundreds of thousands of people a year in the US alone. And it's something else to do it against vaping, where the statistical models that look at, deaths associated with it, where they're mapping out, these many young people will eventually die. If you look at them closely, they're mostly all assuming that people will start vaping and they'll switch to smoking and then they'll die. So there, did you have any questions before I keep on my diatribe?
No, actually, I mean, part of that, obviously, or hopefully was, for folks to get to know a little bit about you. And I've sort of, framed this as, you have an expert here in the messaging and media influence over folks, in the public health sphere. And so I don't know if you wanted to add some more detail to that, and then hopefully somebody other than me will have questions.
Well, I'd like to say one other thing, though, about this link between, I know Dr. Mendelsohn, who I'm very happy to virtually meet today, he talked about this a bit, but we've got to make it clear there is very weak research support for the idea that smoking causes depression. Studies that follow this over time that I've seen suggest that the relationship between major depression and smoking, it might be what they call, bidirectional causality, where one is sort of exacerbating the other. And it also, the researchers think it might be that there's some other factors, genetic things, life factors, trauma, that might be causing both more smoking and the depression. So that concerns me. That's one of my biggest concerns here, is that they're building this whole campaign on a foundation of sand. It's a very weak foundation. I was looking up a qualitative study of people who are dealing with depression who smoke, and I think it was very instructive, where they talked about, if I want to quit, it's hard for me to quit smoking when my mood is so low. I have to be in a more stable place to even begin to quit nicotine. And the fact that the things that are happening, the things that exacerbate the depression and the need to smoke are, this lack of sense of control over their lives, not being bored, not having meaningful activities, which certainly we all saw that happen in COVID, a big increase in boredom and lack of meaning and lack of sense of control. I'm sure familiar to a lot of you all listening. And then, then smoking is sort of like an escape or crutch. It makes you feel better in the moment. So there's just a lot of things that are, they're feeding on each other. And one of the biggest problems I have when I look at this is I think, I'm looking at the public health thing. Yeah, youth depression, anxiety right now is a big issue that we should be drawing attention to, definitely. And I commend Truth for that aspect of it. But I think that they're focusing, the way they're doing this is diverting attention from things that actually could help the youth suffering from depression and anxiety. In some ways, this reminds me of you mentioned in my introduction that I worked on video game violence research for a number of years. And this reminded me a little bit of the stuff I went through with video game violence being blamed for youth school shootings. And the FBI and the Secret Service did research and said that's not the case. But the main problem with that was that if people are looking, video game violence, and that's what's causing youth aggression, youth delinquent behavior, they're going off they're doing a wild goose chase, and it's diverting attention from things that could actually make a difference. And it was very easy for politicians to say, "Oh, parents, I'll protect your young people from the scourge of violent content in video games," instead of saying, "Well, what is really going on with causes of societal causes of violence or of aggression or problems, and how can we address that?" Those are a lot harder to address, by the way, especially within one election cycle. But it can become a very cynical way of kind of distracting from a real problem that needs attention and making people think they've addressed it when they've really just sort of slapped a Band-Aid on a piece of it. I
just wanted to jump in and add, I was listening to some testimony in Colorado earlier before we came on, which I cannot listen to these committee hearings and city council hearings. It is really just grueling to listen to the nonsense over and over again. And it's even more distressing hearing people who, as you say, are people who just, they want to deal with the problem. They want to protect their children. They want to protect their communities. They genuinely are concerned, but they come armed with the same talking points about these policy solutions that we know are not ultimately going to be successful. And part of that was, it had me thinking that, this sense of lack of control, as you mentioned, I mean, it's super amplified right now because of what we've been through for the past 2 years in the pandemic, and now war. And so, even without that, I think what a lot of people are searching for is this very convenient, like, head of the snake. We want to, and this was, spawned by a woman talking about her son who died tragically from fentanyl, but she laid the blame at that flavored vape. That's what he started with. He progressed to THC and went on to using other drugs, and it was just presented in this way. And I'm just visualizing this person, this very concerned mom, wants to cut the head of the snake off, and I know that we all want that simple solution, but unfortunately, it's just not there. So anyway, I'm sorry I jumped in, but
no, please, absolutely. When I was just scrolling down while I was listening to you, I was also scrolling down through the Truth's multi-page document about what they're calling their colliding crises: youth mental health and nicotine use. And I was looking to see, do they anywhere give information on things people could do to address those feelings? But no, they go right to ban flavored vapes and call your politicians. Because really the concern I have here, I mean, in addition to the, this spreading the misinformation, we all know that there's, I think most people listening to this chat have seen the data on how the general public and health professionals, so many of them, the majority of them, think that nicotine is what's causing cancer and causing other health problems. And if you think that, and really the Truth Initiative, a lot of the Truth Initiative stuff kind of muddies that. Why are you going to quit smoking in favor of reduced risk products? Whether it's vapes or pouches or other kinds of things, or going to NRT, nicotine replacement therapy, assuming that you are too stressed to actually quit nicotine, which is probably very likely right now for many, many people. They're making, I think they're risk gaming. People say, well, screw it. I guess, I can't deal with this. I can't do anything. It's all dangerous. I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing. And their message is about, vaping, danger, danger, danger. They say they're trying to target youth with a lot of these campaigns, including the government ones on vaping. But we know that young people then go and talk to their parents. And if the parents are thinking, oh my gosh, I was going to try this vaping like my neighbor or my sister, but now I think I just should stick with my Camels or my Newports or what have you. It's very dangerous. And the other thing is, it would have been, I would have been so happy if Truth Initiative, instead of just going right to the ban vapes in this document, if they would have at least taken part of this document to say, talk to your kids, or hey, teens, there are, we understand that you may be turning to nicotine as a quick fix. Let them call it a crutch, whatever they want to do to deal with your stress and anxiety and lift your mood. But there are other things you can do that won't addict you. I'm trying to think, how would they phrase it, right? And here are some things you could do. You can call, don't be isolated. Find ways to connect with your friends, whether it's over the internet or some other, or an app. If you can't be there with them in person, now that there's a break in COVID, at least for now, get together with them, hug your friends, spend time with people. Even if you're feeling low, go ahead and try to, get yourself to go out, take walks. So there's a whole, I think I mentioned to somebody that my doctoral dissertation at the Harvard School of Public Health was actually about training high school teachers to identify and refer young people who might be depressed or suicidal. So, I have a pretty good familiarity, even though I'm not a clinician, I'm a public health person, with this, symptoms of depression and things you can do. And I've also, had some history in my family of this as well. So, there are a lot, if assuming people are, if we're talking mild to moderate depression, getting people to go for walks, getting them to exercise. There's a lot of things that people can do in their daily lives that are as effective as antidepressants, according to the data. So, they could have put there any. So long story short, there's a lot that they could have put in there with examples and specifics and quotes from young people talking about, here's things that I do to try to deal with my stress and my anxiety. And this is something we're all going through. Help them feel connected, maybe connect into some kind of, online buddy system or peer support hotlines or whatever. I'm not seeing any of that. And this is such a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, and all of that, certainly good advice for, people of all ages, for sure. I know I need to get out more. It's been brutally cold up here, but we're starting to warm up. But with that, I did want to pitch back to Colin here. I don't know if your audio is sorted out until you talk, but
I think I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One of my questions, I know, in your book, you have a section on young people, the risk to young people. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm going to mess up the numbers here. I'm not really the numbers and statistics person, but I think you quoted something like 0.3% of Australian youth are using vapor products regularly. And I don't know that the number is all that much different in the United States, which is a very interesting parallel there, that e-cigarettes are so strictly regulated. I mean, you can barely call Australia's regulations, it compared to the United States. Yeah. And then, the other thing that to maybe bring it back, or, another point here, is, what we touched on before, or you brought up, which was, nicotine relieving the stress of withdrawal. And, given that we have, most kids, whether it's Australia, the United States, the UK, or Canada, or wherever, the majority of young people using these products are just experimenting. And I want to look at that and think, these are not young people who are likely to progress to habitual use.
Exactly.
And so I think one of the questions is, compared to smoking, what's the withdrawal like? What's the quitting process for a young person, even for a young person who is, habitually using a vapor product? Is it the same? Is it easier compared to smoking?
Yeah, look, I think the first point you make is a really important one, that the incidence of dependence on nicotine in young people is actually very low. And we've seen that in studies from all around the world. Kids are mostly either smokers to start with, but regular use by non-smokers is actually quite rare. And studies that have looked at the level of addiction or dependence in vapors in the US, for example, have found that it's less than 3% of kids who've never smoked have symptoms of nicotine dependence. So I think that's a hugely exaggerated issue, because most kids are not dependent. I mean, kids experiment, they use it short term, and developing nicotine addiction is actually quite uncommon.
Yeah, I mean, just from my experience as a young person, I remember it's certainly not the instant addiction that people make it out to be. It was a process for me, and I know a lot of people, especially if you're 13 years old and you're picking up cigarettes, it's not something that you can do every day or every hour of the day. And it wasn't until I, was 16 and got some autonomy. I got a driver's license. I can go disappear from the watchful eye of teachers and parents all afternoon if I want when I'm 16. And that's when habitual use kind of started. Even then, it wasn't, it was outside of school hours whenever I could get away. It wasn't, I don't need under somebody's definition,
exactly.
That's habitual use. But yeah.
Yeah. And look, that's what the studies show, that I mean, most use is, most use is now by smokers. Most regular use, almost all regular use, is by young people who previously smoked or currently smoke, and they were addicted to nicotine from smoking, and they probably still are. But it's the non-smokers. What's important is, are the non-smokers becoming long-term users? Are they becoming addicted? Are they going on to smoke, being smokers? And that's where the real harm comes in, and there's no good evidence of that. In fact, the evidence suggests it's quite rare. And could I just go back to a couple of points, Alex, just that Cheryl was saying, and hi Cheryl, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, look, I think you made a very good point about all this targeting of the young. I mean, it's politically appealing. We're protecting the kids. We're fighting the tobacco companies, but it is demonizing vaping, and it does discourage adults. And this is part of the thing about vaping. I think this is just feeding into that. I'm not as charitable as Cheryl is regarding the Truth Initiative. I suspect that, attacking vaping is just a self-serving, single-minded goal, preserving the relevance of the Truth Initiative. We're protecting the kids from evil tobacco companies. We need money to keep doing this. It's a very convenient target based on misperceptions and appeals to parents, and I think it's quite cynical.
Yeah, actually, I would say, I think while Cheryl was describing the Truth Initiative effort here, I just had replacement crisis in my head, much like replacement smokers. There's certainly a self-preservation involved in that.
Yeah. Well, kids aren't vaping anymore, as we saw in the New York the National Youth Tobacco Survey recently. 1.9% of kids are smoking. Less than 0.4% of kids are smoking daily. So they're losing their relevance, and this helps them to maintain it.
Yeah, I mean, do either of you think that, given the very low smoking prevalence among young people, are we likely to see within our lifetimes this, a cohort of young people who grow up and just don't touch combustible cigarettes?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you look at the graph from the National Youth Tobacco Survey, it's just continuing to decline, and it's accelerated since, of course, vaping became available. And as I say, 1.9% of teens in the National Youth Tobacco Survey, and that's in high school, have used cigarettes once or more in the last 30 days. Well, that's virtually, tobacco smoking in young kids is virtually over in the US. But that's a problem for the Truth Initiative. So we've got to find some other evil to target. And in this case, it's vaping.
Yeah, I think I really want to make sure I'm not the only one talking. So Danielle or Logan, if you guys want to chime in, feel free.
I did have something that I just wanted to mention quickly when talking about the Truth Initiative. I know, we can be a little, as Colin said, a little less, have tact when we're talking about them. But, in one of the more recent videos that I did, the Truth About Vaping videos, there was a Public Health Law Center panel where I think his name is David Dobbins. He's like one of the head guys at Truth Initiative, was literally talking exactly about this issue. And I have, an audio clip of him essentially saying, the money that we got, from the cigarette companies initially, because that's how Truth was started. They were initially started with MSA funds. He said, that's kind of running out. And in order for us to be able to keep fighting these evil, now vaping companies, we need funding to fight, because it's running out, and we're not going to be able to do that. So I think it's a pretty clear indication that, a lot of this is in fact about funding. I don't, mean to say that they are necessarily trying to do evil, because I don't believe that either. But I think that funding is definitely a huge part of this. And to what Cheryl said, it comes off as incredibly disingenuous, this, mental health campaign, that exactly as Cheryl said, they're not giving young people any tips for mental health, right? If you really cared about the mental health of young people, not only would you be encouraging them, if you really felt that vaping was contributing to stop vaping, but you would be giving them other tools and other resources. But there is nothing like that in any of this documentation. And so to me, like I said, that's just incredibly disingenuous.
Yeah, if I can kind of chime in here, this is the mental health and vaping and nicotine. All of this is really, if we can frame it in in just the general, in drugs and youth, this idea of, these mental health issues being caused by drugs, really the reality of it is all too often drug use um, a way to cope with trauma, with life, with all the additional stressors. We see this in low income families, and things like that. And this is typical, this is typical dogma. This is typical drug war tactic to blame the drug instead of addressing actual underlying issues. And it's just really, it's really shameful to see, Truth Initiative go after the mental health crisis that youth are in right now, and simply just blaming it on vaping, as opposed to really getting in and addressing what's going on.
Yeah, it's a very cynical approach. That's for sure. I mean, I think the evidence is very clear that yes, stress is playing a key role in kids taking up smoking. That's one role. Kids do use it for that, but vaping does certainly help some of them with stress. And if you take that away, what's left? They'll go back to smoking, or they'll just become more anxious and depressed. So they're not looking at the counterfactual here, which is, well, without this, what are the likely outcomes?
I think it can be very hard for an organization like the Truth Initiative. I see a lot of my public health colleagues. I think there's such a high that you get, a good feeling that you get from being the good guys, from being the white knight, fighting the evil empire that people, that was big tobacco decades ago. No question, they're killing a lot of people, and they still are, but. It's, I think in some sense, I think maybe emotionally, there's an effort to hold on to that black and white, we're the good guys thing. And there's a reluctance to acknowledge that maybe there's a lot more gray area now than there used to be, and that something very different is happening here. And anytime there's a profit motive involved, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's, makers of nicotine products, whether it's nonprofits that need to raise money, and academia too. I mean, there was a lot of pressure when I was at Harvard on you got to fund yourself. So money is a factor in everything. But to come back to really looking at the facts, I have a feeling. My gut feeling is that we're kind of at the crest of a moral panic here about youth vaping. As Colin knows, the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco is having their conference in the DC area this week. And they this year are not allowing any scientists who work for traditional tobacco companies or any company that is partly owned by a traditional tobacco company, which is like Juul, to even attend the conference. It's not that they can't present, it's that they can't even be there. They have to skulk around the edges. And the reason given was basically, well, some of these people were walking around without their name tags, identifying them as corporate people and, talking to people just like they were regular people. And the sense is they might contaminate the good guy scientists with their corporate evil. I mean, it's really is the kind of corporate cooties is what it feels like. And we have to get, but at the same time, we see that happening with SRNT. We just saw that article last year in the American Journal of Public Health by 15 former presidents of that same society saying, hey guys, we're way out of whack, we're way out of balance. We've got to look at the adults and we got to look at the data on the youth that's showing how this is going down, down, down. And the data on the actual health risks of vaping versus smoking, and the lack of a clear link showing that, as we originally feared, vaping might be a gateway direct to smoking, as they used to, talk about, the relationship between smoking and marijuana use. I mean, the fact is that youth risk behaviors cluster together because they're experimenting. And I'm sure Colin could say a lot more about that.
I've just lost you there, but but absolutely, and I think youth vaping is one of the least risk behaviours that kids do participate in. I mean, if you compare it to smoking and alcohol and illicit drugs, it does a lot less harm, but it's getting a lot more attention than it deserves. But just to go back to that point about the tobacco company, I think the war against the tobacco industry has taken precedence over public health. And the irony is that, in opposing vaping, we're actually supporting the tobacco companies. We're supporting combustible cigarette smoking. And that's where this whole campaign has gone off track. It sounds good on the surface. Yes, we want to destroy the tobacco companies, but in fact, we're actually what really counts is it doesn't matter who makes these products. If they help people stop smoking and if they improve health, that should be the priority. It's not they're still stuck in that past war against big tobacco, and the effects are harmful to public health.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we've been pointing out, I think, for years, and is just becoming really obvious. The more that, like, Truth Initiative or Matt Myers, for example, I watched some of the video from yesterday at SRNT. When these folks talk about what the appropriate environment for selling vapor products or any other reduced risk product, they seem to be thinking in a vacuum where cigarette sales don't exist. It is this suggestion that it's adult only establishments only, and in the Truth Initiative's report or position statement on what harm reduction is, people would have to sign a logbook to buy these products. Meanwhile, there's no reason to assume that cigarettes are going to stop being sold at gas stations directly in the eye line of anybody paying for their purchase. And so it's weird. I mean, are these folks just so blinded by ideology, or do they have a degree of confidence that, at least in the United States, we're going to see cigarettes disappear from the public view?
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen. And I think they are ignoring the counterfactual for sure. I think we've seen that vaping is diverting kids away from smoking. That's why the smoking rate in the US has accelerated downward since vaping became available. So I think if you focus on vaping and demonize it, people will go back to smoking.
And we've seen that there was data from the Federal Trade Commission showing that during the first year of COVID, the sales of cigarettes, at least to wholesalers and retailers, did go up in terms of quantity of cigarettes. And so that's very concerning.
Yeah, I think I wonder. I mean, how was there any follow up to that? Like, how much of that was just sort of hoarding or preparing for not being able to go shopping?
Well, that was shipments. Shipments, I think, to the sellers. I don't think it. I'm not sure if it was purchases. There's a whole. You have to go to the FTC website and look at the report. I only, frankly, looked at the first page or two because the economics are not my field. But it was definitely a quantity ship, not a dollar issue.
And I mean, I know overall we did see at least adult smoking tick up. We were at like 14 point something percent at a couple of years ago, and now it's gone back up to 16. So there is some measurable increase, and likely, of course, due to the stress of the COVID times.
Yeah, I'm concerned. This is anecdotal evidence as opposed to solid research here. But I live in the middle of Silicon Valley in a town called San Carlos. And I guess walking around here in the last few years, I used to notice, I mean, there's always a certain amount of marijuana smell, but I'm thinking, smells in the air that I'm noticing. Aside from that, I used to smell vaping more, little hints of fruit or something here and there. And I haven't smelled that in the last 6 months or so. And I'm smelling smoking much. I like a couple of times a week or more walking around, and I really don't get out that much. I'm smelling cigarette smoke, and that's something that I hardly smelled at all a couple of years ago. And that it just makes me think, what is going on here? It makes me think that smoking in some circles, including, the Silicon Valley area, where people were very hostile and basically drove Juul out of San Francisco back to the DC area. I think that smoking is actually becoming more socially acceptable than vaping, which is really scary.
It's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. I feel like I've noticed the same thing. You know, I live in a small town up here in way northern New York, but when I first moved here, I just remember seeing, you know, the vape cloud coming out of people's cars, and you would see people downtown. There were a couple of vape shops downtown. I lived above one for a little while, but it just seemed more prevalent out in the wild. And now it's just been that way for probably, I would say, probably around the time that maybe just a little bit before, but also after the lung injury cases sprung up here almost exclusively in America. That after that, it seemed like I just didn't see as many people vaping.
I think it's possible that, you know, even though the trends are so wonderful, and as Dr. Mendelsohn said, that we're seeing, there's great charts that you can see based on government data that showed the downward trend with cigarettes, and how when vaping came in, it just accelerated in this beautiful way. And I'm concerned that it could be possible that we'll have that loop down and loop back up again if people are looking for if they're thinking, well, all these nicotine things are the same and you got to die of something anyway, and I'm looking for something to do. And things can spread, trends can spread so much more quickly now with social media and the internet than they ever could before. And it really worries me that we've got to get a handle on addressing these myths about nicotine and addressing this misperception that vaping is just about as bad as smoking, which it so is not.
Well, you know, I think that actually kind of sets up for you. We got about 15 minutes left here, and I want to be respectful of y'all's time. And again, thanks for joining us tonight. But, you know, it like you mentioned with the Truth Initiative report, I don't think we'd be doing our job if we weren't talking about solutions. And right now it seems, you know, that for us, the biggest issue here is misinformation, and combating the misinformation, and getting the people who need these products the truth about, you know, how to switch. And so at least in the United States, I think, you know, folks have been talking about this on Twitter today, and it's been brought up. I think, you know, we made a comment at TipSAC on one of the modified risk applications. You know, is this something that is going to be exclusively in the hands of FDA? Do we need to, and do we have any confidence that FDA is going to come around to this, or are they? Is it now purely political for them? And I don't know. Ultimately, my question is, like, you know, the way forward. Like, what can we do better to make sure that folks have the information and the access to these products to improve their health?
Yeah, look, I would say, sorry, just jump in. I would say that I mean, the evidence is, I think, increasingly clear. But I don't think the FDA is making its decisions on the evidence. I mean, they're setting up all these barriers, and I think a lot of the decisions are based on political factors and you know, financial issues and all sorts of other pressures. So just presenting the evidence doesn't seem to be enough. I think the decisions are going to be made politically to solve this problem. But I think we also have to win the hearts and minds of the public, and that will put pressure on the politicians. And the more vapers that come forward and speak up and tell their story, I think that's going to cut through a little bit more than just the evidence, which unfortunately, you know, people interpret in different ways, and the evidence that suits their agenda.
I also think we've got to make more of an effort to figure out how to reach academics and health professionals sort of one at a time, because with this massive misunderstanding. When I did the CASAA weekend show recently, I was talking about how most doctors and nurses, they don't have any idea that a lot of these reduced harm products exist unless they have, you know, friends or relatives who are using them themselves, which is probably relatively unlikely. And there really needs to be an effort to raise awareness that, hey, these things exist. I mean, for example, you know, nicotine pouch products have been available for, I mean, you can find studies in the literature from, you know, like 2009, 10, 11 about pouches. They've been around for a while, but if you look at some of the public health literature that talks about it from a more kind of a political side, or things that say industry watch, they'll be like, oh, there's this new thing. It's a pouch and it's so easy to conceal and kids could try that next. That could be the next jewel. You know, and then people who, you know, have worked in the area, or people who are nicotine users might say, wait a minute, these are not new, these are not unusual, but there's just this constant search for the next thing that's going to attack youth. And so I think to get around that repeated cycle of moral panics, we're going to have to get out there and educate politicians, and educate health professionals, and educate academics.
Yeah,
for sure.
I agree with that. And look, I don't want to push my book, but one of the reasons I've written the book is to correct that misinformation. And yeah, in Australia, we're making sure all the politicians get a copy of the book, and we're sending it out to health journalists and other stakeholders. And I think the book is, I mean, it's got 400 references. It's very evidence-based, and it does present the evidence, which I hope some people will read. And we know it's very hard to change people's minds once they've made a decision, but you would hope that slowly, when the right evidence is slowly presented, that they will, some of them at least will make that shift.
Yeah, for sure. And just advanced or current thank yous to both of you for participating and correcting the misinformation here. And I, you know, oftentimes, you know, when we talk about the Truth Initiative, when we talk about campaign, and we talk about a lot of the activist organizations, we do take a tone that is, in a way, a bit combative and not the friendliest tone, as you might imagine, from a group of people who feel put on and attacked over the years. We may be a little bit short on patience, but you know, I feel like you know, both of you and some other folks that we've all met through you know, talking about and promoting tobacco harm reduction. You know, there are a lot of people who have stepped outside of that tobacco control bubble and really taken the opportunity to you know, question the dogma and the propaganda and the outcomes of those campaigns, and are looking at this in a more critical light. And I think, you know, if there's a message out there for the folks who we might identify as opponents, it's that the door is always open. Your curiosity is what matters, and that, you know, as soon as you can and open up to accepting the evidence that people like Colin and Cheryl are putting out there, you know, take a stand, just come out and tell the truth. And I think that's, you know, it doesn't necessarily take it. You got to be a little brave for sure. But
yeah,
you know, there is an opportunity for people to maybe reclaim that white knight status here.
And look, there's very much a groupthink problem here too, that if you are in one of the public health charity, medical organizations, and there is a dominant narrative, if you step outside that, you really are putting yourself at risk in terms of funding, career opportunities, and so on, research funding. And so it's very hard to take that step outside the dominant group think. And I think it's very hard for people.
Yeah, I know academics have been shunned for just, you know, writing one report with industry funding.
Yeah. They're very quick to smear anything that's connected to. They're very quick to smear anything that's industry funded, rather than, you know, objectively analysing the data that's being presented.
That was actually something that struck me in one of the presentations at SRNT yesterday. I forget the woman's first name, but she's from the University of Minnesota. Her last name is Carroll, and she was one of the authors on the piece that was published in I was at Nicotine and Tobacco Research, about the, you know, young investigators, young researchers coming into a polarized field. And as she was introducing her work, she said that you know, she I guess the study was sort of blank is divisive and something else, and what she wanted to do was investigate e-cigarettes, but not really because of the effects that it might have on her career. So I'll just sort of backpedal my statement there about becoming the white knights, and I feel I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that there are incredible professional hurdles for people, and it is a money issue, and it is a reputation issue, and so I will backpedal a little bit and have to express some empathy there as much as I possibly can.
That,
It's
that
it's a
goes a long
career.
way, I think.
Yeah, it's a career for younger academics and people in the industry. For them to step out of the line early on in the career is very difficult. For me, towards the end of my career, I don't care what people think of me, and I think I have to say what's right, but I can get away with that. Whereas if you're beginning a career in this field, if you speak heresy, then of course you're severely and harshly criticised and marginalised.
I'm in the same boat, Colin, where I feel like I'm toward the end of my career, and I'm not affiliated with the university any longer by my choice, and I feel like people like us who have an opportunity to sort of try to help be someone who can help build bridges and meet in the middle, where we aren't at risk of having our careers derailed or having our funding taken away. We've got to do that, actually, my husband, who's a psychologist, was trained with Dorothy Hatsukami, who's a prominent researcher in this field. And at the American Psychological Association some years ago, they did a session together with a few other researchers on sort of, how do you deal with collaborating with industry and trying to, build those bridges. And it was sad because I think there were as many people on stage as there were in the audience. But that's one way to try to reach out, is to say, let's talk about what is, how do we ethically collaborate across tribal borders. And I think sunshine and openness is absolutely the key ingredient.
Yeah, for sure. And even calls from I think within SRNT for or maybe it was the Truth Initiative, calling for a more transparent authorization process through FDA, which transparency for sure could benefit some of the members of industry who are trying to bring their safer products to market. So on those notes, I don't want to end things abruptly, but I'll open it up again for Logan or Danielle. Any other questions, or Colin or Cheryl? Anything that we didn't touch on that we would benefit from here?
Yeah, no, I think this is a fantastic conversation. Just to add, I guess, a little bit of personal experience here, as somebody who's grown up with depression, suicidal ideology, self-harm, history of self-harm, and somebody who also used to smoke, I can tell you one of the best things I ever did for my mental health was to quit smoking and switch to vaping. But I'll tell you, one of the worst things I ever did for my mental health was start advocating for it. And I joke. This is this area, this space is definitely one that takes a lot of diligence. But I just can't help but think of our youth today and think that they just deserve better than millions of dollars being spent on commercials and graphics and campaigns that don't really address what's going on or address their needs and simply put a laser focus on maybe one of the few things that they are doing to seek relief. And that's really discouraging, because what do we do next? Say we help all the youth around the world quit vaping. What about their mental health now? Where do we go from there, and what has that done, for them? So I guess that's just kind of where I want to leave it. Really is again, to frame it, in the sense of drugs. We blame the drugs, but where do we go from there? And what can we do besides campaigning against depression sticks? What can we do there what can we do from there to help our youth?
Yeah, addressing the trauma, addressing the isolation, the factors that are driving these things.
And I wanted to add too that in addition to, like Cheryl just said, addressing the underlying issues, I think organizations like Truth, they're not going to be able to make any headway unless they can actually be honest about why people, smoke, or why people do use nicotine products. And they, in this report, they sort of touched on, people feel like, nicotine helps reduce stress or helps reduce depression. But really, that's not the case. But I mean, it is, though. Like, we're not advocating, that you should smoke to cure your depression. No one is saying that. But to deny that there are, in fact, benefits that people, like Colin talked about, that there are, in fact, mental benefits. In fact, nicotine is even being studied for things like Alzheimer's. There's the MIND study that's going on right now. There are actual therapeutic effects from nicotine, especially, if you want to outside of combustible and the harmful constituents there. And I know I'm speaking in circles, but to deny that is just, you're never going to be able to have an honest conversation and really help people if you can't even admit why, if you can't agree with them that there is a benefit that they are getting out of it and try to help them move from there, if that makes sense.
I think the problem with that is that undermines the narrative that people have, that people are only smoking because of big tobacco is marketing to them. I mean, that really was something that I kind of accepted without thinking it through very much until I started to really talk to more experts and to smokers. I think that's just a bias out there that, they wouldn't do it if they weren't being sold it. And they need to have that belief brought to the front of their minds and really analyzed and have evidence address it. And have that challenged.
I absolutely agree, because especially in this day and age with so many regulations on, tobacco companies, it's not like kids now are growing up seeing, Joe Camel and ads everywhere and your doctor saying use this one. That sort of stuff doesn't exist anymore. And yet there is still an underlying prevalence of smoking. So obviously, there's something else going on there. Like Logan, in my youth, I definitely have a history of, suicidal ideation, mental health issues, self-harm as well. And I knew almost from a young age that I was probably going to smoke because there was just some sort of draw. And I think there is a genetic component. I think a lot of things. But it did give me a therapeutic benefit. That's why I did it. Not because I saw advertisements or not because, no one in my family smoked. Like none of these things, I never grew up with it, but I was drawn to it. And I think that there's a reason for that. And if people, can't be honest about that, they're never going to make any real headway.
And if cigarettes weren't available, would you have tried vaping?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I would have. I didn't even particularly like, and I don't know that there's any, maybe there's a few, I can't say, absolutely, but smoking is difficult. You know what I mean? When you haven't done it before, it's painful and it's uncomfortable and you have to get your body used to it. But obviously, there's a reason to go through that. There's a benefit there that we are sort of chasing as people initiating smoking that makes it worth it. And for, academics or researchers or nonprofits to not even discuss that is just so, it's so disheartening. Like, yeah, it's very frustrating.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're at 8:00. We've had you guys for an hour. Give another opportunity in case there's anything else we wanted to discuss. But other than that, I think we'll probably call it a night here.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure to talk with you all.
Yes, and thank you. Please keep up the good work. I mean, we mustn't give up, and it's just a shame we haven't got, certainly in Australia. You have more in the US, but people just need to come forward enough political increases, people will start getting the message. But yeah, I think we're in for a slow ride.
And Colin, please don't be shy about promoting your book. It's important, you have to get the word out. And I think, a reputable person such as yourself, when you say with all of those citations, and you're someone who people who might not be inclined to listen might be willing to take a peek at, and it might crack open their thinking a little bit.
Yeah, look, I'd like to see doctors getting copies, MPs getting copies. I mean, they hopefully will be open to the facts, and that's what the book is basically looking at. So I'd love to see it distributed to decision makers and to key people, and that's why I've written it, because I want to change the agenda, and yeah, it needs to be out there.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'll just mention it again here. It's Stop Smoking, Start Vaping. If you want to visit CASAA's information library, it's under our resources tab on our website. It's featured in our recommended reading section, along with some other good books to check out, not just on this topic, but mainly on this topic. Yeah, lots of great work from you guys, and I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your evening, morning for you, Colin, and coming on and talking with us.
It's our pleasure.
And so, with that,
my book's available. I just want to add, my book's available for Kindle and as an as well. So some people might prefer that. So just to let them know.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. I bought mine off of Amazon, and I had both options available. And then I actually thought that the book had been stolen off of my porch, and I thought, well, I think probably crime goes along with smoking, so maybe they'll get some use out of it. But it was in my mailbox instead.
Love it.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'll call this one to a close. CASAA will be on live on Saturday on our podcast, 4:30 Eastern. And we'll do this again in 2 weeks. We're going to try to get Dr. Brad Radu to come on and talk with us about the NYTS data and other things. And he himself has a story about being either blackballed or on the verge of being blackballed, because he is one of the early voices out there promoting tobacco harm reduction, and so we'll pick his brain a little bit about that as well. And so I'm pretty sure I have not said all of the things, but go ahead, Colin.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay,
no, I have nothing else to say. That's fine. Thanks. Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Okay, great. And so with that, thank you guys. Thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. Hopefully we'll have a recording of this up on our website. And if you're new to this, if you're new to CASAA, go visit CASAA.org and join. It's absolutely free. We don't send you lots of spam. We will send you notices when legislative stuff comes up, and you can get involved and take action and stand up for your access to these products. But again, go join CASAA.org. And we'll try to keep you in the loop there. And of course, a ton of resources on our beautiful new website, including Colin's book. And so I think that's that. Logan, do you have any elegant goodbyes to drop in here?
No, sir. I think you just did a fantastic job. And and thank you to Colin and Cheryl both. Thank you for joining us tonight. Definitely appreciate both of your insights, and yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
All right. With that, we'll call it a night. Thank you all.